Please help me welcome back to the stage the film's directors, Llewellyn M. Smith, Sam Pollard, and the film's subject, Charles Blow.
I've gotten so used to Sam telling me what to do. Whatever he says, I just do it.
Thank you so much for that really thought-provoking film. Just right off the bat, I'm curious why you moved, if you're from Louisiana, why you moved to Atlanta and not back home to Louisiana?
Delta. Wait, no, listen, I made a list of 3 places that I could move. One was Louisiana, not my hometown, but New Orleans. Another was Miami, and the third was Atlanta. And just the pros and cons wise, first of all, Florida ended up not being where I would encourage anyone to move, so it wasn't on my list of places. And Louisiana, I didn't feel like needed. Georgia was on the cusp. It was a battleground, and it felt like the energy that it needed my energy more. And it was convenient. You know, it's a Delta hub, but I could just get to all the places that I needed to get to do the work that I do. And so the pros went up.
Sam and Llewellyn, you guys have been in the documenting of Black life thing for a while. It's Black Side crew. We got Henry, who did the DP, who's the DP. So what brought you to this? This fits in the continuum of what you guys cover, but what brought you to this particular story?
Well, for me, I had read Charles's book, and I was really intrigued at the premise and the thesis, and I said, man, this is fascinating. And then I turned Lou onto the book, and we both thought it was something that was important, an important story to tell. And you know, my family and Lou's family, they both migrated from the South. My family from Mississippi and Georgia to New York, and cousins and uncles to Chicago and to Detroit. So, you know, to me, this was like a story to sort of look at what the idea of this reverse migration and the impact it could have for black people. So that's, you know, to me, it's what you just said, Karen. It's part of the continuum of telling our story. Very important to me. Lou?
Yeah, what I would add, Sam's right. We both have a background, our family's coming from the South. I think one of the things that was powerful for me about the book is questioning sort of I don't know if it's the myth, but the assumption that the Great Migration North provided just about everything that black people needed in terms of economic development, in terms of opportunities. The story that my mother tells she's passed away, when she was, one of the stories she tells about my father is coming from Virginia to Boston, not being able to find work in the trade he wanted to be in, and having to work under the table at a Glazers union. So it's like, and I think there are lots of other people who are African Americans who've had that kind of experience in the North, where you can make it, but the struggle and the cost, emotion and cost on the soul was just a lot.
I'm a Yankee also, Lou. You know, my family's from Boston. What do you advise for people who don't have roots in the South? Do you still recommend that they go and try and lay down some kind of ownership?
Well, here's the thing. This is what I say to everyone. If you're happy, comfortable, successful, feel safe, feel nurtured, feel like your culture is honored where you are, maybe you found your home. In fact, not only did not everyone move during the Great Migration, most black people did move. However, if you have not found that, if you do not feel safe in your neighborhood, if you do not feel like you have access to ownership of property that you live in, if you feel like you do not have access to proper education, have access to the infrastructure of your city. Not that you can't walk past it and there's some big glorious buildings there, but you have access to those buildings. If you believe that there could be a space where you felt more comfortable, more valued, your money could go further. You could actually begin to build wealth because you could own property, then maybe it is for you. If you are, like I was here in New York City at the height of stop and frisk, Quinnipiac kept asking the citizens of New York if it was okay with them, even though we knew what it was doing to black boys. And every time they asked that question, the majority of white people in this city said yes. While I am at home raising 2 black boys and worried to death because Michael Bloomberg has basically said, I can just Xerox this piece of paper and stop and frisk everyone that looks like this. That doesn't feel safe to me. Just because you are interested in hugging a tree and agree with gay marriage and agree that every woman should have access to health care does not mean that you are also a racial egalitarian.
What aspects of the book were not included that you'd like to speak on?
Well, I will say this. For all the people who get jitters when I say that that we were restoring something that already existed, that there were already black majorities in these states, but somehow freak out about that. There are, I think, 7 states right now where the white population is 90+% of the population, and nobody says a word about that being a problem. And they pretend that that is just a natural thing. That this is a natural migration pattern, when it could be no further from the truth. The country enlarged itself by displacement of Native Americans, often through savagery, even more often through broken treaties. And while it was enlarging itself, it was restricting the access and the mobility of black people so that they could not do the movement that those white people were doing. And so whenever someone says to me, oh, you're talking about segregation, I'm like, are you talking about that same segregation in that 95% white state you're talking about? Because if you're not talking about that, please don't talk to me about segregation. Because even when these states were majority black, they were majority black by 3, 4 percentage points. And when they were majority black, there is no record that those majority black states tried to do what we have seen black people subject to in this country. They never tried to punish white people. They never even, I can't find any record of them ever even uttering the words that white people had uttered about them, which was that they were afraid of black domination and they would do anything, including terror, to prevent these black majorities. So I just take exception when people start to argue to me about whether or not it's a problem that I think that we could return to some states having the black majorities that they already had, and the only reason that they lost them was because of white terror.
When black folks from the North are moving back to the South, are they predominantly moving into black communities, or are they moving into white communities and changing the demographics in that respect?
All of America is resegregating. And that has nothing to do with me. It's just that's what the data shows. And we see it, it manifests itself first in our school data because our schools are locally zoned. And so we now have a situation where schools are now more racially segregated than they were when Brown v. Board of Education was decided. And ironically, there's no place more segregated on an educational level, school level, than, right? So this is happening, and there's a demographer in Chicago, in Cook County, who has done a lot of research around this, and what she found was that it was not being driven by Black or brown people, that people's concepts of what diversity meant was different. And that what she does is she uses housing data, which is great, because you say whatever you want to say. Where do you buy your house? And what she found was that for a lot of Black and brown people, they would try to buy in the best area they could, regardless of who lived there. What she found about white people, they were trying to buy in places where they were majorities, even if it wasn't quite so good. That segregation is happening, has nothing to do with me. And I think that when people are returning to the South, there's a mixed bag, but there are a lot of people like Janine, who is actually here, who moved into neighborhoods where they didn't have to deal with that. They moved to the neighborhoods where it had a lot of other reverse migrants, and a lot of them were Black people, and it was just easier and safer for them.
To the filmmakers, every film is like a thesis on whatever subject you're documenting. What were you surprised to learn while making this film?
What was I surprised at? I think that the process of making the film with Charles, I think that I was surprised at how sort of naturally there's this sort of intellectual tension that's, I think, part of you, but also becomes part of the film, sort of really commitment to these ideas. But the film also has, I think, has a lot of heart, and I think that's reflected in you as well. I mean, those two things I think are really powerful. I've shown a clip to, I think I told you I showed a clip to Annie, and she was like blown away about the emotion. It wasn't the story, it was the emotion, And I think that, for me anyway, I think that was one of the things that was satisfying about making the film, was that the range of sort of different energies that were there, It wasn't all straight ahead politics. There's this other thing that's really powerful in terms of your commitment that I think drives it for me.
My response was, I wasn't surprised. I mean, I thought that what Charles was doing was provocative, it was engaging, it brought about dialogue. I really loved the sequence when he's in Chicago, and he's having the dialogue with the lady who's going to stay in Chicago, and his whole approach and his whole philosophy. And for me, just like what Lou said, for me, the emotion plus the intellect is, to me, it's very powerful to see him engaging with different people, like the mayor of Miss Jackson, Mississippi, or the young lady in Chicago, and then to see him in Gippsland, with his family. All that speaks to me, This all speaks to me. So I just was like, this was an important document to create, to bring about conversation and dialogue.
Charles, you mentioned in the film that you're all for breaking the system, where Republicans need Black people to win and Democrats stop taking us for granted. How do you see that happening?
Well, I mean, I think you just started to deliver states. To deliver states. I have never seen a president and vice president visit Georgia as much as they have since Biden won. They're there all the time. They may as well get an apartment because they delivered a state in a part of the country that no one thought was possible. And that coalition of voters was led by black voters. And when you can demonstrate that you can do that, it changes the dynamic. It changes the dynamic. If people always told, like black people, you had power because you helped, deliver wherever, Pennsylvania, whatever. That's not real power. That's not real power. They basically come to you at the last minute with a fear message and say, white people are basically about to tie and split it down the middle. Can you break the tie for us? Right? That's what they said. Because you're 10, 15, 20% of the population in that state. And if it was real power, when they lost in 2016, what you would have seen is an appeal to you. But instead, we got book, Hillbilly Elegy. We got all kind of books about how to appeal to the angry working class white voter. They weren't appealing to you. They were appealing to the people that they knew had the power in those states. All of a sudden, this time around, they're camped out in Georgia as well because they realize there are enough people there who have enough power to flip a state and their electoral college votes on the line. That's what power looks like. That's when people stop taking you for granted. That's when people start showing up. That's when people start coming when it's not an election year and it's not in the 11th hour.
I'm going to open it up for questions. Anyone has any questions for Charles or the filmmakers? Could you hear that in the back? The question was, how important is patience in manifesting these changes? Yeah, more or less.
I will say this, the Great Migration played out over almost 60 years. The reverse migration probably has been happening for 30, but nowhere near at the pace of the Great Migration. So what I'm always talking to people about is having a vision that is both short and long. The transformation of Georgia happened basically over 30 years. The last time a Democrat had won was 1992, and Bill Clinton won the state. At that point, black people were 25% of the population of Georgia. They are now about a third of the population of Georgia. It took a while to get those numbers, but black people continued to migrate to Georgia over the last 30 years. And so, and only in 2020 do you see the actual change. So it is a long range idea. There's no snap of the fingers that changes everything tomorrow. But because it's already happening, what I'm saying to people is, and I always think, I have kids. I just can't imagine, I don't want to leave a world where they are struggling with the same thing I'm struggling with. And so I am thinking long term, even if it does not manifest completely in my lifetime, that it is important for the children and the children's children that it manifests.
I think we have time for one more question.
My hope is that people with deep pockets and big organizations pick up and do the rest of the work, because it just takes, the National Urban League was incredibly important in the Great Migration. They used to hand out pamphlets at the train stations in Chicago, just trying to help people to acclimate. There's just no one helping. People are just moving and they're just figuring it out. There's no help. There's no infrastructure. There was the black press was incredibly strong then because the press was basically segregated and people leaned more heavily into black press. But the Chicago Defender was incredibly influential in getting people to migrate. We don't have that same media infrastructure that could do the encouraging. We don't have people on the ground who could do the helping. We don't have people where there's no industry that is recruiting the way northern industry was recruiting black people to come north. Industry in the South is not necessarily recruiting, specifically saying, you, black persons, better job here. None of the things that existed then, the structures that existed then, are operational in the same way now. I can only be hopeful that some of those institutions kick in. Even people with big pockets, I don't care. The amount of money, the billions of dollars that are spent on presidential elections now, crazy. I'm like, listen, literally, few $1,000s a piece to encourage people to move, a grant to make you move, you'll make a bigger difference just encouraging people to move than to spend all this money on radio ads and TV ads and trying to influence social media. The money is just being blown. Because just helping people to move who want to would be a much more efficient use of that money and would be a long-term investment because once they're a voter in a new state, they're a voter there as long as they can vote.
I think that's all the time we have. Thank you all for coming.